Welcome everyone to AI for the Average Joe, Season 2, Episode 7. Erica and Hayley here from Quantum Rise. I hope you're all well. Today, we are looking at something a little bit more nuanced when it comes to generative AI, and we're excited to have Clare Walsh with us. I'm going to hand over to Clare very, very shortly. There's lots of queries and questions which we certainly hear from clients and people who watch the podcast around things like data integrity, ethics, and what all of that means from an AI perspective. So we're really interested to hear what Clare has to share with us when it comes to this stuff today. So welcome, Clare, and thanks for joining.
Thank you. Very nice to be here.
Excellent. Well, thanks for reaching out. So, Clare, tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, and the institution.
So I'm the Director of Education at the Institute of Analytics. My background is in training, assessment in particular. That's what got me excited about analytics, assessment analytics. And then I moved over and retrained in computer science. So we are a membership body, a professional membership body for the data professions, and we support people in learning how to use these technologies, keeping up to date. These technologies change so fast.
They do.
Staying up to date with the law in particular. We do a lot of work advising governments, just to stay ahead and to advise companies on how to use these things safely and ethically.
Yeah, which is so important at the moment. And I think it's from our perspective in that area, it's great to have organisations like yourself, because it does feel a little bit for everybody else like the blind leading the blind, because it is so new. So the fact that there's organisations working alongside governments, like you said, from that perspective, I think so valuable for people to know. So.
Mm. And I think one of the risks with these new generative AI technologies, I mean, there is a risk to not using them.
Yep.
Because they're just so good and they make you so much more productive, and you are going to fall behind if you ignore them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are some things you should know. It may feel like you're using a Google search engine sometimes. It's that easy. And we've got very used to intuitive design where we don't have to ask any questions about what's going on in the back. We just use it. We don't need training. We've come to expect this idea that we shouldn't have to make any effort whatsoever to use these technologies. But actually, there are some things that you should be aware of, and there are some questions you should be asking. And I think that's where we perhaps push a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a good point, that actually, and I probably fall into that camp a little bit, Claire. I'm kind of like, I don't need to know how it works or what, all I need to know is the output and what I get from it. And it's really interesting that
Mm,
you've compared it to a Google search engine, because that's exactly what I would do. I was like, it's almost like Google on steroids. It's kind of doing more for us, and
mhm.
gleaning more information. So I'd be really interested to understand what some of those things are that you're talking about. What are the questions that I need to be asking or thinking about when I'm using it? That would be really
Mm.
helpful.
Yeah, so one of the big questions is around the environment. We all know we've got to be more responsible. We've got to bring our carbon production down. These things are beasts when it
Mm.
comes to carbon production. We don't know for sure because we haven't been able to get in and measure any of these tools, but experts estimate that it's around about 50 times more carbon produced in, for example, just a simple chat GPT query, which is just text-based. Text-based is pretty simple, than a Google search. And
Gosh.
Wow.
if we start searching on these tools like we do, mindlessly all day, every day
Mm.
with our phones,
Yeah.
it's gonna have a massive impact. And it's
Mm.
not just the carbon; it's also, the land degradation to mine, the water used to cool these data centers. So it's not to say you shouldn't be using them, because
Mm.
sometimes they may actually be better for the environment because you're saving time and you're saving effort. But you should be asking these questions and you should be thinking about this before you just go on there and start producing.
Mhm.
So that's one of the big things, definitely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um,
And for somebody, Claire, who's kind of a, maybe a freelancer or someone in a team in an organization using generative AI and large language models, from that kind of ethics and integrity perspective, and from a practical use perspective, what kind of things should they be considering, do you think?
so we have some very clear guidelines, which I can share in a moment, but there are
Great.
sometimes when you should be using it. So one of the great things is that you can flip it around and bring the AI in early in the brainstorming process, and it can be brilliant at that. Looking for data sets can be, you know, we all talk about a data-driven organization, but actually a freelancer, what data do they have access to? Probably not that much, but there are open data sets out there, and these tools can do a really good job of finding those for us. Some of them will be made up, but enough of them will be real. In terms of freelance creation, anything you want copyright of, do not use these tools. You do not own it. The company who produced the large language model that created it, they own it. But things like marketing, copy, quite honestly, the machine can probably do better than you. We offer some other guidelines, like you should always make it clear that a machine has written it, not a human. That's just ethical good practice. You should always review it. You know, you can only ever ask the machine to do something you yourself could do, because you're going to have to go in there and check it and review it.
Yes.
And if if you're asking it to do things you can't do yourself, then how do you know it's safe or not? And so it's some of those just basic questions around understanding this is not a search engine. It's a completely, totally different technology. And we have to have a process for dealing with error, because error is absolutely fundamental to how these machines are built. It's unavoidable.
Yeah. I find myself saying to people quite a lot, people who say, but AI and data protection, AI and copyright, AI and IP, AI and this. And I say, well, what happened before AI? Well, we still had these challenges and these problems around data protection and copyright and IP. It feels like AI shined a light on a lot of that stuff now, and we're having more conversations about it, which is a really good thing. But this isn't a problem that AI has caused. It's kind of, people say, where's the right place to start when it comes to data protection and large language models? Well, what does your data protection policy currently say? So I think sometimes it's reminding people that, we have these policies and things in place, but AI is raising it all to the surface, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. So this is another never ever scenario. Never ever put personal data into one of these machines ever, because you have just chronically broken the law, and you don't know when that machine is going to spit that information back out to anyone. You have no control over it. That's a never ever scenario. Never ever write the code. I mean, we work with a lot of coders, and they sometimes put their code in to check, because it's really good at that. You've literally just handed your code over, and you never know who it's going to share it with, when and where. So, anything that you need to keep private, do not get them anywhere near those machines.
And that's quite a difficult balance for people, isn't it? Because you kind of know the traditional stuff like dates of birth, national insurance numbers, all that kind of stuff. People know that that's private data. But I suppose when it comes to data analysis, because there's data analysis tools now sitting in GPTs, isn't there? And that kind of, without even thinking, I'm going to put this spreadsheet in. And I think that's where it won't be that people do it intentionally, or they think, oh, it won't matter this time. But it might just be that they haven't got that. They don't take that moment to think, especially if they're using these tools all the time and it's just another thing that they're doing. Because there is quite a lot of data analysis, coding. We're hearing a lot of those conversations, Erica, aren't we? Around,
it's almost like it encourages you to do that with the new GPTs, isn't it? It's like, and there's no red warning flag that comes up to say, don't put this kind of data into me,
Exactly. We had to rush out guidelines. It kind of at the beginning of last year, it became clear something had changed, that we were in a new kind of world. And we call them large language models, but of course everything is language to these machines. So we started seeing some machines coming out this time last year that would work with DNA. They would work with brain waves. And brainwave scans. So people had literally created a mind reader that was functional and working, and it's like, it's going to destroy the James Bond movie moment when they ask him where the microchip is hidden. It's like, well, plug him in. And it's kind of like, okay, come on, we need a slightly more nuanced rules around these generative AI technologies. They are not like anything we have seen before. But they feel so familiar
and intuitive
and
easy to use and accessible.
There are no barriers to using them whatsoever. And that's a little bit of a worry.
I get that.
Do you think, Claire, we're sleepwalking into this like we walk into the internet? I know that's a big question.
No, I mean, everybody always argues, well, the internet just grew out of the pornography industry anyway. We all know that. And it's true, and it kind of, you can see the consequences of it. I think yes and no. So some of these large language models are fantastic, and you have to know which ones you're using. So confusingly, open AI is actually not open. It's quite controlled, it's quite censored, it's quite safe. You know, it's going to be quite hard to corrupt that thing and get it to produce inappropriate content, despite the name. They kind of flipped and decided, you know, we need to bring back control of it. But then other ones that you would also maybe think are the same and you can trust, you know, they're not at all. So when Facebook put their Llama, one of their old Llama models, on open source, when we say they put it on open source, it just means they made the code available to anyone to download, tweak, change, interfere if that's what they want. Most people just improve it. We've always been very supportive of that because it's, you know, it's free. It's amazing tools and they're free. But immediately we had uncensored Llama. And it's like, hang on a minute, that doesn't sound like a very safe thing. And, you know, and some of them out there, like Stability AI, have created Stable Diffusion, and that's already being used for incredibly unethical things by unethical groups because it's open source and you can. And you know, and that's the worst use cases that we can imagine, you know, the non-consensual porn, those kinds of things. So you do need to ask questions about which model you're using. Can anybody change the code? Is it under control? You know, what kind of reassurances does it come with? I think most people are using the controlled, safe versions, but you have to have those questions. You have to have those discussions.
But there's so many different places, you know, there's so many different tools coming out all the time, and even where we might use ChatGPT, which is generally what we go to, we're then speaking to other people who are using another tool that does the same thing and another tool over here. So I guess that's where you lose control, isn't it? And don't really know which ones are closed and safe and ethical.
And in principle, I'm saying you should always declare when content has been produced by a machine. You may not know some of the content that's been produced. You know, obviously, if you're asking a ChatGPT, you know what's going on. But sometimes, you know, it's if you're working business to business, you may not. It may not be obvious what content is or isn't. And so there is this incredibly complex chain behind these really easy to use tools that are incredibly intuitive, and there are some urgent questions we should be asking, and there is more regulation needed, not to control the whole industry, but just some things going on with it. We have an amazing opportunity right now. In answer, going back to your question you originally asked me, are we sleepwalking into a massive mess? You know, lessons have been learned by many of the producers of these tools. They are doing their absolute best. They're going to get it wrong, but at least they have a feedback mechanism where somebody works out a way to get around it, and they, you know, bring it back under control. And we're going to have that process. But then there's this other little rogue area that's going off on their own, producing, you know, exactly the same stuff that created the mess we're in today.
Well, you've got the dark web, and you know, goodness knows what's happening there as well, isn't it? So that's why you're safeguarding, and the EU AI Act, I know, kind of still within development, and you know, UNESCO are doing a load of stuff around their global observatory and stuff, which is fantastic. And you mentioned earlier, Claire, that your organisation's involved in advising governments and organisations in this stuff, which is great. But that's not a catch-all, is it? We've all got our own part to play in this stuff on an individual and a company level.
Yeah, so I mean, I never want to say let's go really heavy with the AI regulation, because it's just going to put good guys off.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, stifle innovation, and we don't want that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we saw that with particularly with GDPR. You know, I'm a huge fan of it. It was a fantastic piece of legislation, but small guys who didn't understand it just got terrified. They saw the fines and the threats, and they, you know, they just opted out, and that's also a risk.
Yeah.
So we're kind of, we don't want to push when we suggest regulation. We don't want to push for anything too hard, too harsh, because it's not going to stop these bad guys who are doing truly awful things. They know, I mean, there are laws. It's illegal to do all these things, but they're still doing them. It's how do we catch them? How do we prevent them? It's not, do we need new regulation?
Yeah, this isn't going to stop them, right? Yeah.
No. And it's a lot of it is about training. It's, come on, guys, listen, look, I know you can use this, but here are some things you should know.
Yeah.
You should, you know, here are some questions, you know, and we've got a bit lazy.
Yeah.
We've come to expect to never have to actually learn how to, you know, to sit down and have a course on how to use things.
Yeah.
I suppose as well with AI, just with it happening so fast, you know, like you said, it was the beginning of last year, you're thinking this is going to be big. What are your thoughts on, you know, on children accessing this as well? Because obviously, you know, whatever regulations or advice we put into place, it's going to take a while. It's taken this long for them to do it, for schools to be doing any kind of internet safety, and now we're moving on straight away into something else. That's, you know, like you say, there's so many things and so many things that can go wrong with it, and awareness that there's obviously a risk there, I suppose, as well with young people.
It's really hard. I think it's incredibly hard. I mean, the worst use case that I've heard so far is some teachers in Canada had non-consensual porn made of them, and I suspect it was the students that did it.
Oh, God.
And that just literally creates a scenario where education cannot exist. You cannot have an education system where that is allowed to happen. That's how serious some of this gets. And you know, and these are kids, and again, you know, somebody's got to be telling them where the boundaries are, where the absolute no boundaries, you know, and what will be the consequences of this, and you better really think twice. This is
But
not
without the adults or the parents or the teachers or the schools understanding it,
Yeah.
it's a bit of a black hole, isn't it? Because
That's the gap, isn't it, now?
where are the educators? So it's almost another real benefit to understanding this is for the next generations and the younger people that, you know, can't always make such informed decisions or don't make such informed decisions about what data they're sharing or what information's going out there, and how different that is to sharing something on TikTok or Facebook. It's really, really interesting, Claire. And I think, like you say, you don't want to put people off using it, but it's just being really aware of what's happening to that information, and whatever you put in is it's there.
Yeah. I think, and I think we also have some, I mean, we were talking about last year being the year when trust breaks down, that if anything comes across digitally, you have no idea whether that's actually the person you think you're speaking to, or if it's a fake version of them. And I think that is a cause for concern. Certainly there are large language models that can copy your voice perfectly with something like, I think it was like 8 seconds of input.
Wow.
Which is enough time to say, you know, I'm sorry, you've got the wrong number. And then you can fake that voice undetectably. And so things like, you know, trust, we're having to have conversations with our kids. Let's have a safe word where I know it's you that's phoning me and telling me you're in trouble. You know, it's that kind of level of things. We've already started seeing political bias creep into these large language models, and there's nothing anybody can really do to stop that process. ChatGPT is becoming slightly more liberal in its output, and Llama's becoming slightly more you know, right-wing in its output.
Interesting.
And that's going to start. That's going to grow because you can't stop it, because it's learning from the content that's going into it. And so
psychologically, it's a human brain. It's coming from human behavior and language, isn't it? From the Reddits and the Wikipedias and people's opinions. And
and certain people are drawn to each language model, and so you're going to get certain focus on each one, and and once that becomes known, then you're going to go to the one that serves your purpose. And so we do
the
have
algorithm.
Isn't it? Yeah.
It
Get
comes
more
back
and
to
more
that.
of the same stuff. Mine's mainly golden retrievers and parenting, but that's a bit more
I
innocent.
I know. Yeah.
Brilliant.
But it's interesting what you say, Claire, because I read over the weekend that Google had to halt, I don't think it was Gemini, I think it was another LLM that they're working on, because it started producing content saying that Nazis are now classed as ethnic minorities, and so it started kind of that hallucination, that kind of lack of context, which it doesn't have motivation, it doesn't have a soul, it doesn't understand context or intuition. So that could actually be a really serious message, that if somebody didn't pick that up, what does that mean for human history? So actually it's philosophically, this has massive impacts compared to, like, going back to your original point, Google or a search engine. So
and it comes back to that difference between search engines and this machine, and this is why it's so carbon heavy and so environmentally polluting. Each time you have that request, it has to go back over the entire trillion document data set that it was trained on and find the response. Now, we don't sense that because it's just so fast. So fast. We don't have that sense of look up every single data point it's looking at. And then it will just find one that it finds convenient and reproduce that. And if it's been trained on websites that nobody knows what it's been trained on, and it's gone away and found that content somewhere on there, it has no sense that is rubbish. It just it's what humans say, and whatever humans say is right, which is a bit worrying. So there are some things we should be aware of. There are some opportunities right now to get control of these things, because not that many people have trained a large language model at this point in history. This is tough technology to actually create. And we want more of the good ones, because the good ones can do amazing things.
I love that. So true. Claire, I know you were going to share something with us as well, weren't you?
I was, yes. Yes, so if I'm terrified,
lift it up into something positive.
I'm not just terrified with my
I do feel very reflective after that conversation.
Yeah, I do as well.
Don't worry, I have a solution. I'm not just here to
we like solutions. We like solutions.
So come along to our website, ioaglobal.org. Go to the Insights page and resources. And we have a number of things here. I mean, what we found was that we have our general ethics guides to using data, but we felt, actually this needs its own nuanced policy. So you can download our generative AI checklist, and it just gives you some very clear do's and don'ts of how to use these. We wrote these actually internally for our team, because we do want them using them, because they are just an amazing productivity tool. And who doesn't want to do things better, more efficiently? But there are also some guidelines there for what you shouldn't be doing. So please do go ahead and download that.
I think that will really give people that confidence, because it's knowing that you've considered the things that the experts are saying we should be considering. It will just give hopefully that layer of confidence to get the benefits from it.
I think it supports adoption. Once you know what the unknowns are and what the risks are, I think there are some, I think you can confidently go forwards.
Confidence is the key, isn't it? Brilliant. Claire, if people want to learn more about what your organisation does, or more about what you do, or want to get in touch, what's the best way of doing that?
Please do visit our website, ioaglobal.org. Or we also have an email you can send to us, hello@ioaglobal.org. We'd love to hear from you, and we're here to help navigate this difficult new world that we're all going to have to work in.
And it's fantastic for people to know that you guys are there and you're accessible, and you've got some great frameworks and resources that you're sharing free of charge there as well, so that's great news. Thank you so
very
much for joining us
Thank you.
today. That's been a great conversation. Again, like you said, nuanced through a different lens, but just as important, and brings another level to this, certainly for us, and I'm sure for our watchers as well. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much for having
Thank you
me
so
on.
much, Claire. Cheers.